Helping me today is my colleague, Hannah Fan, coordinator of special education. I'm so happy that you could join me today. Before we get started, I'd like to take a brief moment to introduce you to the Zoom control panel. Captions. You can view live captioning of this webinar by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button on the control panel on the bottom of your window. Interpreter video. To keep the ASL interpreter in view, you can select Pin Video from the drop-down menu above the interpreter's video. Chat box. Broadcast messages from the Kennedy Center team appear in the chat box. Also, a button on the control panel. Leaving the webinar. If you need to leave the webinar early, you can leave it by clicking on the Leave button. A recording of the webinar will be available afterwards, so you can catch up on any parts you miss. Audio. The built-in audio output for this webinar is your computer speaker. You may also connect to the audio through your telephone. If you use your telephone, please make sure that you mute your computer speakers. If you have trouble automatically connecting to the computer audio or difficulty hearing me, try clicking on audio settings or join audio. Asking questions. You can submit comments, questions, or answers to questions using the Q&A option. Please note that this is different from the chat box and allows moderators to view your questions. Please make sure that your question is directed to all panelists. More about asking questions. If you prefer to speak your question or comment rather than typing it, please click on the raise hand icon on the control panel. Hannah or I will touch base with you and unmute your microphone at the appropriate time. Changing your view. Today's presentation will be conducted over a screen share. You can adjust your view by zooming in or zooming out by clicking on View Options menu at the top of your window. This webinar will cover. During the webinar, I will talk about how to prepare a VSA program contract proposal, and I will answer questions related to the proposal form. Asking questions. If you prefer, the webinar will cover Q&A at the end. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box anytime during my presentation. I'll be happy to answer your questions during the designated time at the end of my presentation. This webinar will not cover. Please note that I will not be answering program-specific content questions in this webinar. These types of questions can be answered by calling me at 202-416-8847 or emailing me at sslitvak@kennedy-center.org. The RFPs. As you know, the Kennedy Center recently released 9 different requests for contract proposals, or RFPs, to deliver VSA programs for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. These are VSA Arts Connect All Professional Development Program, VSA Arts Connect All Workshop Residency Program, VSA Children's Visual Art Discovery Program, VSA Playwright Discovery Program, VSA Tilt Digital Storytelling Program, VSA Museum Access for Kids Program, VSA Performing Arts Access for Kids program, Rosemary Kennedy Initiative, and VSA EZ program. How many proposals? A non-commercial entity, such as a nonprofit organization, may submit proposals to a maximum of 2 different RFPs for which it's eligible. An organization may only submit 1 proposal per RFP category. Please note that individuals are not eligible to apply for a VSA program contract. How many contracts? The Kennedy Center will issue a contract offer for no more than 1 proposal per eligible organization. New for 2021-2022 is that special education credentials are required for all VSA programs. In previous years, this has only been a requirement for the professional development program. This now means that all organizations must have a staff person, a consultant, or an advisor with special education credentials substantively involved in the development and/or delivery of the VSA program. So make sure that that you list the credentials with the person's biography in that section of the proposal. Use VSA activities. For the VSA Children's Visual Art Discovery Program, you may choose your required 2 activities from any of the 5 VSA teacher resource guides that are online at kennedycenter.org. The link to the teacher resource guides is listed in the RFP. You may also search for VSA research and resources on kennedycenter.org. Once on kennedy-center.org, the path is education, then networks, then conferences and research, and then VSA research and resources. It's a little convoluted, and if you have difficulty finding it, please don't hesitate to contact me. No minimums. The VSA EZ program is perfect if you have a small number of participants or have a short event. There's no required number of participants and there's no required number of hours of instruction to meet. This contract is for between 1,000 and 3,000 for an event, a workshop, or a series of sessions. So this one is very flexible and I recommend it if you are having difficulty meeting the minimum requirements for participants or hours of instruction for the other programs. RFPs for venues only. 2 of the VSA programs are for venues only. For the VSA Museum Access for Kids program, you must be a nonprofit museum. And for the VSA Performing Arts Access for Kids program, you must be a nonprofit brick and mortar performing arts venue. Resident companies are not eligible to apply for this program. Professional venue and show. Please keep in mind that for the VSA Performing Arts Access for Kids program, you must be a professional venue. The shows must take place at your venue and the shows must be professional. It's not appropriate to have students performing for students for this particular program. More than playwriting. Despite the name, the VSA Playwright Discovery Program is broader than playwriting. It is for writing for performance, so it includes scripts for theater and musical theater, as well as screenplays for film and video. You're not required to write about the disability experience, but it is preferred. RKI partnerships. The VSA Rosemary Kennedy Initiative is for arts organizations to provide transition opportunities for youth with disabilities. A key element to making this program work is for the arts organization to have a strong partnership with schools, school districts, or disability service organizations. If you are a disability service organization, work with an arts organization to have them submit a proposal. I urge you to read carefully every section of the RFP you're interested in. All of the RFPs have been updated slightly from last year, so please read the entire RFP, even the boring legal parts, just to make sure that you haven't missed any requirement. Read the RFPs carefully, especially the core program components on page 2, the logo and training requirements on page 3, and the eligibility requirements on page 4. They're similar, but not the same in every RFP. So if you're trying to decide between several RFPs or going to apply for 2 different RFPs, please make sure you look at these sections in each one. They're not identical in every one. Contracts, not grants. These RFPs are for contracts. They're not for grants. And I can't stress this enough. The Kennedy Center is seeking contractors to deliver VSA programs to become VSA program sites. We want our VSA programs to impact as many of our constituents as possible. Our constituents are students with disabilities, pre-kindergarten through grade 12. We're looking for good contractors to help us to do this by achieving our program goals around the country. Contracts, not grants. This is a contract for hire process rather than the grant process that many nonprofit organizations are used to. It is a competitive process. We're looking to hire organizations that have the best qualifications and are cost effective. Contracts, not grants. Please keep in mind that these are contracts to do work for the Kennedy Center. These are not grants to organizations to support the organization's programs. So it's a very slight but important difference between contracts and grants. You are the expert. You need to think of the contract as bringing your expertise to deliver the Kennedy Center's VSA programs to our constituency of students with disabilities in your community. Just as you would receive an estimate from a contractor to renovate your kitchen, the proposal you submit is your estimate to the Kennedy Center of why you should become a VSA program site and what you will do as a VSA program site. Tell us about your experience, describe your services, and explain how these will meet VSA program goals. Explain how you will deliver the VSA program and estimate how much it will cost you to do this work for the Kennedy Center. Use your existing program structures. Existing program structures. In your work as a VSA program site, you may use existing program structures or frameworks that have proven to be successful. You may also choose to combine the contract fee with existing funding sources to better achieve VSA program goals and expand your services for the Kennedy Center and other stakeholders. For example, if the fictional organization Kids Awesome Arts applies to be a VSA program site, they might say in their proposal, Kids Awesome Arts will provide VSA Arts Connect All workshop residency program services to the Kennedy Center through the framework of our Kids Create program. Do not use grant-like language similar to the contract will support or this contract will fund. Sufficient information. In your proposal, you will want to provide us with sufficient information to evaluate your proposal in both the narrative and the contract fee justification. We use all of the information that you give us to evaluate the effectiveness of the proposed work in meeting the VSA program goals. We ask that you be particular about the drafting of your proposal. Your text and presentation should be concise, clear, and error-free. Focus on telling us about the VSA program goals and objectives you will achieve in your community. Wise narrative use. Use the narrative spaces in the proposal form wisely. Make your proposal as strong as possible by focusing your efforts on the narrative sections where you describe your services. Have a strong summary description. Tell us how you will deliver the program, goals and objectives, strategies, and learning objectives. Since this is a contract proposal instead of a grant application, you don't have to waste space on justifying the need for the program. We know there is a need for the VSA programs. Carefully review your proposal for errors before submitting. More wise narrative use. Don't assume that we have prior knowledge of your organization or its work. Even if we have worked with you before, take the time to describe your structures, your frameworks, your strategies, and methodologies where asked. This is not the time to rely on us being familiar with an existing program name. For example, we don't simply say something like, we will use the Kids Awesome Arts movement method developed over the past 10 years. Go on to explain what the method actually includes. Even more wise narrative use. This is important. Remember to describe very specifically how you will serve students with disabilities. Describe your services specifically addresses the learning needs of students with disabilities, especially if you're working with an inclusive environment. Make it clear that you have thoughtfully developed these strategies, frameworks, and/or methodologies with students with disabilities in mind. Tell us if you will address IEP goals. Tell us what accommodations you will be prepared to provide. Use the words children with disabilities or students with disabilities so that we know that you're thinking about that population. Make sure you describe the learning objectives and goals. Even if you will later collaborate with classroom teachers to customize specific curriculum goals, you're expected to be able to describe basic objectives and goals, especially if you are using existing structures where you can pull from past experiences to inform your response. Estimating participant numbers. When estimating the number of participants, both with and without disabilities, estimate carefully. Use past experiences. You should be able to make a reasonable estimation of the number of participants. You can also use school demographics to help determine the number of students with disabilities typically attending. If schools are helping you, clarify with them if the number of participants is for the entire school or only the number of classrooms you will work with. Don't inflate the number of participants. Estimate as best you can your number of participants, but make sure the estimate is one that you can commit to. If you are awarded a contract to be a VSA program site, you will be required to meet this number of participants. If you go significantly below the agreed upon participant numbers, the contract will be considered incomplete and your contract fee will be reduced accordingly. I highly recommend rounding down rather than rounding up when you're looking at your estimating your participant numbers. For those working in inclusive settings, remember that the VSA programs are about serving students with disabilities. We prefer that the number of students without disabilities does not exceed the number of students with disabilities served. We would never want to see more than double the number of students with disabilities unless it's clear that other monies are facilitating the participation of students without disabilities. Transparent fee. Transparency is key in the contract fee justification or budget. Create a budget that provides us with sufficient transparency into the calculation of the contract fee. Follow the line items given and provide adequate calculations and narrative for us to understand how the proposed contract fee ties to the services you will provide to accomplish VSA program goals and serve students with disabilities. Although transparency in the fee calculation is important, be conscientious of what information you are providing us to evaluate your proposal. Don't disclose proprietary information or information that you don't want us to use in your evaluation process. The budget format. We have a preferred budget format with specified expense categories built into the proposal form. The form allows for flexibility in the level of detail. We expect to see calculations for each line item and narrative when it is needed. The line items will add up to the proposed contract fee. You are not required to outline other sources of funding in your proposal. However, we have provided a budget column for this information if you choose to include it. Show calculations. It is important for us to use your calculations, to see your calculations, sorry. Tell us how you arrived at a particular line item amount. Never simply indicate a percentage of an expense without explanation. Tell us how you arrived at assigning that particular percentage. Was it based on the number of hours? Was it based on the number of students with disabilities being served? Except for budgets for professional development programs, which usually serve students with disabilities indirectly, all other program budgets should clearly show that the contract fee is enabling the participation of students with disabilities. Especially if you are working in an inclusive setting, we want to make sure that the contract fee primarily pays you to serve students with disabilities. In an inclusive situation, it may be useful for you to use the other amount column to clearly separate contract money for students with disabilities and other monies for students without disabilities, particularly if you're serving a high number of students without disabilities. Avoid percentages. Do not list a percentage only in the calculation box. Show us how you determine that percentage. In my example budget table, I have 3 ways of expressing the same expense. In the first line, the organization has proposed that 50% of the teaching artist fee costs $2,000. We don't know why the full teaching artist fee is $4,000, and we don't know why the contract fee is for 50% of the total. The second line of the table improves the entry by showing the calculation for the total teaching artist fee. One teaching artist will work for 5 hours for 2 residencies at the rate of $400 per hour. The budget also indicates that 50% of this cost was selected for the contract fee because 50% of the students being served are students with disabilities. In the third line of the table, the calculation shown for the cost of each teaching artist is the same, but the reason for 50% of the expense being part of the contract fee is that the organization can bring $2,000 of other monies to deliver the VSA program, and it only requires an additional $2,000 of contract fee to include students with disabilities in the residencies. Unallowable costs. Please make sure that you read the list of unallowable costs on page 3, number 8 of the RFPs. These are food and beverages, production costs for performances or exhibits, equipment and durable education supplies and art supplies, space rental of any kind, culminating activities. While we understand that culminating performances or exhibits are important to students, we choose for the emphasis of the contract to be on the learning process in the classroom. On page 6 of the RFPs is an extensive but not exhaustive list of examples of unallowable costs. Avoid including these types of expenses in your contract fee justification. If they appear in your budget, they will be removed from any contract offer you may receive. This is also another place that you can list the supplies in the other category. Make sure that you, if you have an unallowable expense that you want us to know about, make sure it's clear in the narrative that you're paying for it out of other money and include that money in the other amount column. How to avoid cost removal. List your supplies and materials. In the budget calculation box, along with the calculation, list the types of consumable supplies and materials you will use. Use general categories such as paint, clay, construction paper. If they appear in your, you don't need to indicate the quantity or the unit cost of each item. Once again, if we just see supplies and no list of what the types of supplies you're purchasing, then that cost will be removed from your budget. How to avoid cost removal, especially when a performing artist will lead a residency or workshop, list their role in the budget as a teaching artist or a facilitator. This will prevent confusion with the role of performer, which is an unallowable production cost. Please do remember this. Anybody that's facilitating or teaching, especially if they're a performing artist, list them as a teaching artist. In your budget, also make sure you distinguish between staff costs for program delivery and administrative overhead. You probably have a staff person whose times fall into both categories. Maybe this is your executive director. Split time by the role, not the job title. Put the emphasis on program delivery. Administrative overhead is not to exceed 10% of the contract fee. Per capita costs. When you're building your budgets, keep in mind your per capita cost for students with disabilities. This is how we look at your budget. For all programs except for the VSA Arts Connect All Professional Development Program, which focuses on educators, we are first and foremost interested in serving students with disabilities. Even in inclusive settings, the VSA program is all about the students with disabilities. And remember that we're looking for proposals that are cost effective as well as strong programmatically. We want bang for our buck. It's okay to maximize a contract by leveraging program partnerships and funding sources. It's a good thing if you're able to expand your network, expand the reach, and expand the objectives of the proposed services by securing partners or funders. This is a way that you can have a larger capacity than you originally thought, serve more students with disabilities, and it makes you more competitive. Lastly, I'd like to mention a little bit about branding. It's all about the logo. We want the services under contract that are meeting VSA program goals to be associated with the VSA brand. All program site contractors are required to use a contract logo or acknowledgement line to brand the services being delivered as VSA programs. The acknowledgement line is Kennedy Center VSA program site 2021 through 2022. It's all about the logo. We don't expect you to stop using your own logo or that of your funders, but to use the contract logo in addition to these logos. Those organizations who are selected for a contract will receive guidance on mandatory logo and acknowledgement line usage to identify their work under contract. Now I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Just a little reminder that these should be questions about preparing your contract proposal and using the online form. Please type your question into the Q&A box or raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel. Contact me separately at any time after the webinar by phone or email if you have a program specific question or some situation that's specific to your organization.
Okay, Stephanie, it looks like we do have one question, one person who has raised their hand.
Okay.
Okay, Christine, you should be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Oh, hello, I'm Kiki Abrahamson, Christine Abrahamson from Homer, Alaska, and we are almost complete with our delivery services. We have a few more programs slated in June, but up here we, you know, the first time is always a shakedown trip, and we didn't include any transportation expenses, and so those expenses have fallen on volunteer time and money. And I am wondering if we can include transportation expenses in our proposal for next year.
Yes, you can. There is a space for that. And you want to explain a little bit in your proposal about the calculation and who's the transportation is for, and how many trips, things like that. So try and be as specific as you can be about who's being transported.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. And we also do have another question. Do museum art educators working with children count as educators for the Arts Connect All professional development program?
They sure do. Museum educators, teaching artists, anybody that is an educator in the broadest sense is able to be a participant in a VSA Arts Connect All professional development program. So think about that as I mentioned, educators in the broadest sense.
Great, thank you. Is it okay if our program is limited to a single school, or can we work with our local disability service organization, which covers our entire county as a partner?
You can work in a single school. You can work in multiple schools, or I think it's a great idea to partner with other organizations that can help broaden your reach. I think the only thing you need to be conscious of if you're working in a single school is whether there are sufficient number of students with disabilities at that school to satisfy the minimum requirement of the proposal that you're or the RFP that you're responding to.
Great, thank you. Do I submit my entire program budget or just the part that will be under contract?
We're looking for the part that's under contract. So I know that some people have, for instance, huge residency budgets, huge programs, but maybe only a portion of it is what they would like to think about doing for the Kennedy Center. And we just want to make sure that in that one column, the VSA amount column of the budget adds up to the contract fee amount that you're estimating. There's the secondary contract there for the other amount if you want to show us some other income or help explain something else that you put in the calculation or narrative. Hannah, I've got some questions coming in the Q&A box too that I'd like to.
Yes, absolutely.
Address. Let's see. could you please repeat what you said about the new requirement for a special ed certificate? Does this apply to the VSA Museum's opportunity? Yes. So what we are looking for is someone on staff, someone that's an advisor, someone that's in the classroom. It can be anybody that is playing a substantial role in your program. Somebody must have a special education certificate. And we want to make sure that when you write down the biographies of your people who are important to the key people that are important to the program, that you mention that they have a special education certificate or some other credential. This does apply to all the programs, including the VSA Museum Access for Kids program. It's for every single program. Another question that came in is the EZ proposal can come from SPED teachers. Plus, what types of workshops for students are acceptable? So a school, it should not be necessarily from a SPED teacher, but the teacher may actually be writing the proposal on behalf of the school. But a school, a nonprofit, is a nonprofit entity usually, can apply for a VSA contract, and an easy one is appropriate. We are looking for this is very broad. We're looking for any kind of arts education or arts in education program for students with disabilities in the EZ category. We're not specifying what type of art form or what type of activity needs to take place. Question from Jeff. I noticed an update in the budget expense category for lines A and B. It asks for person X times rate times hours times events. Can you describe what is meant by event? Does this refer to individual workshops or classes that make up a residency or other ongoing program with a school? The budget, because it's the same form for all of the RFPs, needs to be a little bit flexible. So event is what you define it as in telling us your explanation or calculation. So it can be a workshop, it can be a museum visit, it can be the entire residency, but we want to know how you calculated how much it's going to cost for your staff and how much it's going to cost for any consultants or teaching artists that you may hire. And so not just putting the this flat fee, but saying we're having this many people for a certain rate per hour for this many hours, and they're going to do this many residencies, or they're going to do this many workshops. And then if that's still confusing to anybody, please give me a call with your actual situation that you're trying to work out, or send me an email, and I'm happy to work it out with you for your specific situation that might be more meaningful for you.
Great, and it looks like you're getting some love in the Q&A box and some appreciation. So that's good. Another question, for the professional development contract, how do I determine the number of students indirectly served?
That's a great question and sometimes can be a little confusing. I think the easiest way is for you to include that kind of question on your intake form. When you're registering people for participants for your professional development program, I would include a question that asks them, how many students do you work with in that particular school year? Don't have people think back to the beginning of time, or if it's very complicated for some people, you can also ask for, how many kids are you serving right now, you know, at this point in time?
Okay, thank you. And looks like we have one more. Our residency is inclusive. Is there a certain percentage of students with disabilities you would like to see in my proposal?
We don't specify an exact percentage, but I think that over time we've established that we wouldn't want to see more than 50% of the students be students without disabilities, so that in an inclusive setting, we would want to see 50% students with disabilities, 50% students without disabilities. If you want to include more students without disabilities, than that 50%, we would need to make clear, both in the narrative and especially in the budget, that you have other monies that are covering the participation of this large amount of students without disabilities.
Okay, and I think this was briefly touched on, but just to be super clear, can we use the contract fee to pay a touring company as a presenting venue?
So unfortunately, the answer to that one is no. That's one of the unallowable costs. It's considered a production cost. So if you're doing the performing arts for access for kids program, then anything that you would be putting up on stage is considered the production and the production cost, and the contract fee cannot be used for those. It needs to help facilitate the students with disabilities coming to the performance. So you might have ticket subsidies, you might have some transportation costs that you could include, the hands-on arts activity that needs to be part of that particular contract, both for the museum and for the performing arts one. So that's where your contract fee could come into play, but not for actors and not for the touring company.
Thank you. All right, it looks like those are the last questions in the chat and the Q&A box. Last call, any questions?
Don't be shy. All right, well, that seems like we've come to the end. Thank you for participating today. Thank you for your questions. I hope that you found this webinar helpful, and I look forward to reading your proposals. Following this presentation, we'll have the recording available. I'll post it on our network website so that you can reference that anytime. And when the transcript is ready, we can make that available also. So once again, thank you. And For those of you that have more questions or comments that come up during your proposal writing, or if you have things that are very specific to what you want to propose or your organization, please feel free to call me at 202-416-8847 or email me at sslitvak@kennedy-center.org. So that's sslitvak@kennedy-center.org. Thank you.